Superman has been appearing on the big screen since 1941, and now we're getting our newest take on the character, so let's talk about Superman's cinematic history. James Gunn, known for directing the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy, is giving us his take on Superman, but the earliest on-screen depiction came from a series of 17 animated shorts released in the early 40s.
The infant of Krypton is now the Man of Steel, Superman!
The series is also responsible for creating a number of Superman hallmarks like his famous intro. For anyone that wasn't reading Superman comic books, which only started a couple years earlier, this might have been their first exposure to Superman, and audiences wouldn't have to wait too long to see their first live-action depiction of the character, which was a 15-part serial released in 1948. These short films were part of an ongoing story. One film would play in theaters for about a week, and then they'd release the next one. Essentially TV before TV was widely available. The series depicted Superman's origin story for the first time on screen, and every depiction of the character after that has stuck pretty close to that blueprint. Superman is actually an alien named Kal-El from the planet Krypton. Right before Krypton was destroyed, Superman's parents sent him off in a space pod, and he landed on Earth. He's raised by Jonathan and Martha Kent on their farm, and even this early, they instill Superman with his core values of truth and justice. You might have heard it as Truth, Justice, and the American Way, but that part wasn't added until the 50s TV series. Once Superman becomes an adult, he moves to the fictional version of New York City, Metropolis. There, he maintains his secret identity working for the newspaper, the Daily Planet, as Clark Kent alongside his love interest, Lois Lane. The serial was so successful, they released a sequel, Adam-Man vs. Superman, as another 15-part series in 1950. This one heavily featured the character Lex Luthor, Superman's arch nemesis who would continue to be a consistent character in many future iterations of Superman. It was only a year later, in 1951, that people got an entirely new live-action Superman, Superman and the Mole Men.
No one is aware that Kent is Superman, valiant defender of truth, justice, and the American way.
It was pretty low budget because it was intended to be a sort of backdoor pilot for the TV series Adventures of Superman. The story mostly revolves around Superman trying to stop a mob of angry townspeople from harming a species of mole people. The mole people are innocent and only came to the surface due to the oil drilling going on near the town. So even back in 1951, Superman was fighting against prejudice to preserve truth, justice, and what he sees as the American way. Now we enter a pretty big time gap for theatrical depictions of Superman. Almost 30 years later, we get 1978's Superman.
Excuse me. That's a bad outfit.
So much of the DNA of modern superhero movies can be found here. It was essentially the first big budget superhero movie. And it was a big budget. In fact, it was the most expensive movie ever made up to that point. And luckily for the studio, the highest grossing movie that year. It was also critically well received and nominated for several Oscars, including a special achievement in visual effects. You can see here on the poster the famous tagline from the movie, "You'll believe a man can fly." And yeah, this is kind of funny by today's standards.
Easy, miss. I've got you.
The effects were significantly more impressive at the time, but I actually think the tagline, "You'll believe a man can fly," refers to more than the special effects. One of the defining features of Christopher Reeve's Superman is earnesty. Reeve plays the character with so much genuine goodwill that you believe he believes the things he's fighting for. And you might think, well sure, those were simpler times, except they weren't. The historical context of 1978 was loaded with the decline of American optimism. Trust in authority and institutions had taken massive hits with things like the Watergate scandal, the Vietnam War, and government resistance to the Civil Rights Movement. And this element wasn't lost on the filmmakers.
I'm here to fight for truth and justice in the American way.
You're gonna end up fighting every elected official in this country.
Despite this, Superman brings an absolute belief in goodness to Metropolis. It's a reflection of the values that were instilled in him back on the farm in Kansas. The American way, according to Jonathan and Martha Kent, is not to react with violence or a show of power just because you can. It's helping those in need, people who are not in a position to help themselves, and holding accountable the people who are doing harm in the world, which in this case is a billionaire with a power complex who is buying up land and then destroying a whole coast to make his real estate more valuable. I think the audience believed a man could fly because they wanted to believe it. They wanted to buy into the optimism of Superman. Christopher Reeve would go on to star in 3 more Superman movies, but by the 4th movie, enthusiasm was dwindling. Superman would go on a near 20-year hiatus from movie theaters until 2006's Superman Returns. Now just because it took this long to get another Superman movie doesn't mean Hollywood wasn't trying. There were a number of canceled projects along the way. One of the most famous of these is Superman Lives, mostly because Tim Burton got pretty far into the development process following the success of his 2 Batman movies. He had even cast Nicolas Cage in the role as a long-haired Superman, but after $30 million of development, Warner Bros. Decided to put things on hold. The solution on how to reboot Superman eventually turned into simply doing a sequel to the Christopher Reeve Superman movies, which is how we got Superman Returns. The idea here was to ignore the 3rd and 4th Superman movies and do a sequel that carried on after Superman 2. So at the beginning of Superman Returns, he has been missing for 5 years, off in search of any remains of his home planet, Krypton. When he gets back, Lois is married and has a 5-year-old kid. Her and the rest of the world seem to have moved on, so this movie is primarily asking, what if the world doesn't need Superman? How does that affect the character and his morals, that duty he's committed to? With it coming out decades after the movie it's trying to be a sequel to, it's kind of a meta-narrative where the movie is asking, do audiences still need Superman as a heroic, inspirational character?
Even though you've been raised with a human being, you are not one of them.
By the end, the answer leans much more toward yes, we need that hope and optimism. Warner Bros. Would reboot Superman again only 7 years later with 2013's Man of Steel. In its early days, Christopher Nolan was heavily involved in the development of Man of Steel. He was interested in helping to produce a modern take on Superman the way he had with Batman, and Snyder was brought on to direct. And this is where we see Superman enter his dark and gritty era. Henry Cavill still brings a lot of earnestness to the role, but the story also focuses on the weight and significance of Superman's responsibilities. Superman's very presence sparks global controversy. The political sector doesn't know what to do with him or how to control him, and the public doesn't know if he should be loved or feared. The way we experience the world as a culture drastically changed from 2006 to 2013, just in terms of the progress of the internet, social media, and having all of it accessible on our phones. Public discourse became much more rapid and honestly more hostile. So if you place Superman in that modern context, you can guarantee there would be massive controversy over his existence as an alien with godlike powers. Ultimately, Superman still believes in truth, justice, and the American way, but it takes a lot more work to figure out what that means and how to achieve it. And things only got darker as Zack Snyder continued his take with Batman vs. Superman. Seeing these two in conflict is entertaining on paper, but is it ultimately satisfying to see characters who are supposed to be heroes fighting for the greater good fighting each other instead? Well, that's up to you, but there's no arguing that it's a far cry from the spirit of traditional Superman stories. Zack Snyder was supposed to direct Justice League, but things get complicated here. In short, Joss Whedon, who had done the first two Avengers movies, was brought in to rework the project into something with more of an Avengers vibe. Things ended up a bit messy and audiences generally did not respond well. A few years later, Zack Snyder was allowed to release his extended cut of Justice League exclusively to Max, which maintained the darker style he had been building. Which brings us back here with 2025's Superman. And we can already see that this depiction of Superman is intended to be much more in line with the spirit of the character that came to the screen almost 50 years ago. A lot of people may watch it as casual summer entertainment, and that's okay, but I think an interesting angle would be to consider how it's a reflection of our time in the same way that the Superman of 1978, 2006, 2013, or any others were reflections of their time. What has changed in our culture that's resulted in a much more optimistic and hopeful Superman returning to the big screen? Is it that things are looking up? Or that things are looking so down that we need stories that help us hope again? A story that helps us discover what truth, justice, and the American way really is. And will we respond to it? I'm excited to find out, and let me know if you are too.